guests and visitors. My name is Rachel Baker. Before I launch into my introductions, just some housekeeping that I am required to convey to you. The first is that we're not expecting a fire drill, so if the alarms go off, please go down the stairs we came in and congregate outside in the rain. Toilets are down this corridor behind us and through the double doors, both on this level, so we're good for that. So that's the housekeeping. I'm the director of the Unit Centre for Social Business and Health here at Glasgow, Caledonian, and for the last 6 months I've also been interim Pro-Vice Chancellor for Research here. And as part of that interim role, it's been my privilege to be able to introduce the Professorial lecture series. Now, I've just handed that back over to Professor Andrea Nelson, but I asked Andrea if I could hold on to this part of the job just for a little bit longer so that I could introduce our speaker tonight. I will say a few words by way of introduction to Professor Olga Biosca. I'll just spend 5 minutes before I'll hand over to her as our headline act. But before I do that, just a few words on the Professorial lecture series and its purpose and its importance. The Professorial lecture series is part of the public role of universities, which for GCU, as the University for the Common Good, involves our research and teaching feeding into the Sustainable Development Goals issued by the United Nations in 2015. And Olga's work covers a number of the Sustainable Development Goals, but most obviously to do with poverty reduction and improving health and well-being. Professorial lectures are an opportunity for us to celebrate recently promoted professors and for them to showcase their research and work and journey to this point in their career, to colleagues, to research partners and stakeholders and students, and of course to family and friends. And I'm pleased to see you all here tonight. Olga has with her husband Alessandro and daughters Alba and Iria, who come from Madrid, arriving quite late last night, I think, and you're very welcome. Also welcome to Olga's Scottish family. Rosie, Jimmy, Denise and little Rosie, you're very welcome. And to her colleagues at the Unit Centre, at the Wise Centre and across the university. Now let me say a few words about Olga. Olga Biosca is Professor of Economics, and she leads the Economics of Health and Wellbeing research theme in the Unit Centre. She has a PhD in economics from the University of Sheffield and an MSc in development economics from the Autonomous University of Madrid in Spain. Before her PhD, Olga's interest in microfinance and in development economics goes back in part to her work with NGOs, financial institutions, and in consultancy work. But in 2011, when the Unit Centre here was still very young, we were trying to build our expertise in microfinance. And we were delighted to be able to appoint Olga as an outstanding candidate to a lectureship in the Unit Centre in 2012. From there on, she has led on a number of different research projects all around financial inclusion, microfinance, health and well-being. She is one of the world's experts in a research technique known as financial diaries, something I think we'll hear more about tonight. And one marker of her excellence in research is that Olga's work has been funded by some of the most prestigious and competitive research funders, both nationally and internationally, including the UK Economic and Social Research Council and the EU Commission Horizon 2020 programme and lots of others. But it's not only high quality in academic terms that marks Olga's research out, it's also impactful and meaningful work. And because of that, Olga has built important relationships with her research partners in non-academic settings. She's generous in giving time to Spanish-speaking academic institutions, participation in a network of over 100 social business centres, globally working on research agendas around the idea of Nobel Peace Laureate Professor Eunice. She's published in a range of leading journals. She is co-founder of the Ibero-American Network of Development Studies. She's a research associate at the Centre for European Research in Microfinance. She brought the European Microfinance Conference to Glasgow last year, where we hosted it here at GCU. And hot off the press, just this month, she's co-author of a new book published by Routledge called Social Finance and Health. Outside of work, Olga likes skiing and dance music, and I'm told that this year she's been to both opening and closing parties at Ibiza. But tonight, we celebrate the latest in her career achievements as Professor of Economics at Glasgow, Caledonian. In her lecture tonight, Olga will help us navigate how money and health are linked in the everyday lives of financially vulnerable groups in the UK. Please join me in welcoming to the floor to talk about money and health, disentangling the vicious circle, Professor Olga Biosca.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. And thank you everyone for being here. It's so nice to see so many friendly faces. This is slightly petrifying, but I'm so well supported today. Thank you very much for making the time to come today and celebrate. So when I was thinking about how to structure this talk, which is slightly weird, slightly different than what we usually do, I was thinking, about the other major accomplishment that academics have, which is usually writing the PhD thesis or finalizing a PhD thesis. And I was thinking, how is a PhD thesis kind of structured, and how do you start? I start thanking people, right? You start with the acknowledgements. So I'm going to do an Oscar style thing and start thanking people. And I'm going to start, if this works, which it doesn't because it's not on. Yeah. With a picture of football, don't worry, you're in the right place. Still in the right place. And I've got a picture of Olga Carmona because she's got my name. She's a Spanish football player, and somebody in the room told me that football is a great way to engage people. Nobody knows who that will be. But I wanted to thank my parents with this picture, because when I was born in Spain in 1980, Spain was a conservative place, just out of a dictatorship, and it was very traditional, very, Let's leave it there. In 1985, when I needed to start school, my parents were living in the north of Spain, in a very rural area, very disconnected from the capital city, Madrid, just on top of Portugal. And my mom made the decision to take me back to Madrid to a school where I didn't only learn English, but also, as my maths teacher told me the other day, it was the only school in Madrid where girls played football. And I looked at him and I was like, seriously, I thought, equality of opportunity was a thing in 1986 in Madrid. Well, apparently it wasn't. But then he looked at me because I was so surprised, and he said, alongside boys. I was like, oh, wow, So, yeah, thanks, Mom and Dad, for taking me to a school that was progressive enough, that then allowed me to do a PhD and come to the UK to work and study. So, I'd like to thank my family, of course. I steal a lot of time from them. So, and thank you for your support, for allowing me to take up the opportunity, doing conferences, placements, travel, and all sorts, and they're always there to support me. And I'd like to thank my mom and my sister. And I'd like to thank them for a million things, of course, but the reason I'm thanking them today is because they are the main carers of Alba and Ilya when I need to travel somewhere far away. And they stay with her, and if they need to catch planes, they'll catch planes, and they come to any city, and they'll always be there, so thanks very much for that. And then, as a working mum, even though I'm part-time, it's never enough. So I have a long list of carers who've done their job so well. It was because they did their job that I was able to do mine. Some of them became family. They're a Scottish family, and they're here today, like Rosie. And then there's a list of others. My colleagues, of course, in the Eunice Centre. This is a very recent picture, but I've been here for the last 11 years, so I also like to thank past colleagues who are not in this picture. For being so inspiring, so supportive, always challenging and thinking about new ideas and new things. So it's been a really good place to work in. I'd like to thank my students, particularly the first cohort of the Masters in Social Business and Microfinance. And I'm thanking them because then they became, there's some of you here, they became, master students, PhD students, colleagues, and now colleagues working across the university. So thank you very much for being so inspiring, bright minds, and bringing all those new ideas. I've learned a lot from you guys. Then, obviously, the senior team members in the Unit Centre are doing absolutely, I've received nothing but support from them through moves, kids, and everything else. So, and the university, really, the management of the university. So, thanks a lot. Finally, my diarists, my research participants, they're so important, and this research is so hard to participate in a research like this. We talk about money, and we talk about health, which are possibly the two most sensitive people, things that you can ask people about. So participating in this is challenging, it's intensive, and I'd like to thank them all because they're amazing, and without them, I wouldn't be here. So I'm going to tell a story in 4 books. And so I'm going to start what brought my interest in microfinance. Then we're going to talk about microcredit in the UK and my PhD. Then we're going to talk about the portfolios of the poor, which is basically what introduces financial diaries method. And then we're going to talk about our new book, Hot Off the Press, which if you haven't talked to Neil McHugh recently, you will know about. Okay, so my interest in microcredit started when I read this book. This book started it all. And this book was sent to me. It's actually the real book, picture of the real book, sent to me by my friend Alana Björklund. Alana Björklund has ended up being a professor in Johns Hopkins University in economics too. But at that point, we were 18. And she sent it from, she was in Seattle, she sent it from Seattle. No question, this was something I would never come across in Spain, like partly because it was in English. It was a first edition of a thing called microcredit. Nobody knew who Muhammad Yunus was at that point. So Yunus in this book starts talking about how he conceives the Grameen Bank, which gives small loans to women who didn't have collateral, didn't have guarantees, and initially in his conception of microcredit, he did it to enable them to start up businesses and then create self-employment opportunities. So he starts up the Grameen Bank. Later, he gets a Nobel laureate for that and for all the women that he's helped through microcredit. Microcredit at the beginning was very holistic. It was not only about the loan. The loan was a means to get something else. It wasn't about financial inclusion then. It was about education and self-employment and empowerment and everything else that came with the loan. Sometimes health, and I'll come to that later. He later became chancellor of the universities. So it was a match made in heaven. It was meant to be. So when I read that book, I did a degree in economics, and then I started working in development organizations. I started in tiny charities that worked in India and Madhya Pradesh and other places, and I ended up before coming to academia in a development finance institution. That was what made me think, okay, I need to move now. Which were pouring, in the case of the development finance institution, substantial amounts of money into development projects, as you can imagine. I was interested in microcredit, so I was working on programs that offered a component of microcredit, and then there was education or health or something else that was attached. The thing was, most of these projects failed miserably. And we went into the follow-up of the projects, and we saw that your ambulance was a taxi, and that your hospital didn't have any people, and that your microcredit institution that was delivering that was forcing some sort of employment to particular clients. The clients were doing other things with the money, which is one of the main critics of microfinance. So, and I thought that was what brought to me the idea that you cannot. It's very important to understand what people are thinking before creating any development intervention, how people are going to use it, and if they are going to use it. And what fails there? Well, it fails that people have agency. And you think, when you give them something, you think how you're going to use it. You can't force this onto people. So that was what failed, right? The reasoning behind, we thought was going to be one, and then it was another, very different. So, I did my PhD in Mexico, working with a Mexican microfinance institution that had a health component and cervical cancer screening, very different from UK microcredit. But then my supervisors, Pamela and Paul Mosley, were writing this book, financial exclusion and the poverty trap. And they gave me the proofs to read of the book. And they were talking about microcredit in the UK. They were in particular working with a Scottish microfinance institution that was giving these tiny loans to women, but this was not for business, it was personal credit. The good thing they had was that they made sure they were affordable, people could pay them back, and also their interest rate was a lot lower than the alternatives, which is not necessarily the case in development countries. So they gave fast, affordable loans to people who were in need. Right? And that fascinated me. And then I met Neil McHugh and Cam Donaldson in Madrid airport when they were coming to the Microcredit Summit, the World Microcredit Summit, which was in Valladolid that year. So I was putting people into buses to go to Valladolid, and they came. And then Neil said something like, "It's Neil and Cam Donaldson." And I said, "Oh, Cam Donaldson, you've got a Eunice Center somewhere," because I was a big fan of Eunice, so I knew. And that's how we met. And I ended up with a lectureship in Glasgow. And when I got here, these were the headlines that were at that time. You know, it was about life expectancy, inequality, huge inequalities, and then this lovely graph, which I totally adore. You know, it's nearly 15 years differences in life expectancy between the higher income areas in Glasgow and the lower income areas in Glasgow. So this is what I started with, and World Health Organization had speculated that this could be due to the social determinants of health. Now this is an old diagram from 1991 from Dahlgren and Whitehead, but social determinants of health are non-clinical factors that affect your health. So it's where you work, where you were born, where you were educated, where you live. And now social determinants, due to health inequalities increasing a lot, particularly in the US, are becoming very popular. And a lot of funders are funneling money into this type of interventions to solve different interventions. The social determinant of health that we focused on is economic stability. Now, what do we understand by economic stability? It's a compound of income, the money you get, expenses, what do you spend it on, debt, your employment or self-employment, support, and this is your safety networks, your friends, your colleagues, but also welfare. And in some countries, in some places, medical bills. So now you know where it's coming together, right? What we were thinking is, right, microcredit affects income, expenses, debt, employment, probably even support. In some places, medical bills. And that connects with health outcomes. Health always in its broadest sense, right? So very, very public health, mental, physical, but in its broadest sense. So this was a big idea. And this was it's a graph taking out a model framework taking out from a first paper, but it looks very busy and complicated. But the idea is simple. The idea is connecting money and health through particular initiatives and seeing how they mediate. And in this case, microcredit. So when we started looking at this, there were others that had started looking at this. Particular colleagues Mahindra and Haddad, they developed a framework which was similar. They were trying to connect one and the other and doing pathways, but they hadn't tried it out. And then people who had tried it out were working with particular microfinance programs that weren't only about the loan, they were also about health. So, you know, they had cervical cancer screening, prevention programs, health education programs delivered alongside the loan. So it was very difficult to know if improvement in health or the non-improvement in health was due to the health part of the microcredit package or it was due to the loan. And then there were others who were doing experiments, randomized control trials, and one of them include a lot of outcomes, but there's no reasoning behind including these outcomes, they just include them. So some of them had included them happiness measures and also mental health measures. And they had found significant effects. But nobody really knew why, of course, because there was no theory behind it, there was no motive. So we were thinking, how would we evidence this connection between money and health, and how would we know if microcredit has an impact? You can always go to statistics, right? surveys. They're nationally representative, they're fantastic, but they're things they cannot measure. So Andrew Lang, a Scottish poet from the 19th century, he used to say that we tend to use the statistics as the drunk men used lampposts. And that is for support rather than for illumination. It's quite hard to be illuminated with surveys, partly because there's a lot of things that they don't measure. For support, it's easier because the connections are already known. We know how those connections work. But for illumination, we need to know how the connections work. So we need to know what is in the black box between an initiative and then something happening. So it didn't work for us. So there was different methods. I'm not going to go in depth into any of them at the moment. We've used Q methodology, we've used systematic reviews, but the method I'm going to talk about is the financial diaries today. So what are financial diaries? So when I was a little bit earlier than I was starting this job in UCU, this lectureship, Darrell Collins, who was a student from Jonathan Murdoch, PhD student, came up with this crazy idea of writing in a notebook all the money that was coming in and all the expenses that were going out of about 50 people in India, in Bangladesh, and in South Africa, and visit them every week during a year to find out where the money was coming from and how they spend the money. And then, because economists, we're a lovely bunch, and we always think that people make the wrong decisions. Why are they making these irrational decisions? They could choose something else. They could make a better decision. Why are people consistently making wrong choices, right? But when you're living on $2 a day, making right or wrong choices, your life depends on it. So you try and make the right choice. Perhaps you don't have the options, right? So, and I forgot to mention, well, I'll talk about that later. So what is a financial diary? I couldn't put some of the real financial diaries. We've had people actually filling in booklets by hand. We've had others who would give us, well, a lot of you know here, because a lot of you have worked in Finwell projects, but with people by hand. We had others who were putting, giving us our balance statements or balance sheets so that we could actually put it ourselves. But basically, we have a date. We have if the money is coming in or out. We have an item, so what is the money spent on, or what is the income. We have an amount, how much do the people spend, and notes. And the notes are usually what tells us more about this, because it's like energy bill arrears. Right, so why are you paying energy bill arrears? And why? I don't know. How did you talk to the loan company? Why are you paying this and are you not paying? And that tells us a lot of information about how people make financial decisions. Okay. So, when we started the Finwell research program, Jonathan Murdoch, who's been a colleague, the PhD supervisor of Darrell Collins, the yellow book, Portfolios of the Poor, was working on the US financial diaries. And this was the first time that it had been trialed in a high-income country, the method. So he kindly advised us and has been continuing throughout to advise us. And we got our FEST project and then others that came. The main idea of the Finwell project is about finance and health, financial management and health, and how are these connected, finding more about that connection. We've been exploring in different projects different types of income enhancing or income stabilizing initiatives, so in other words, microcredit or some sort of benefits of financial advice. So we had different initiatives and with different populations. But that's the idea, to better understand this connection between your health or your money and your health. We've had a lot of partners, and I'm so indebted to them. I mean, we've had, and they're not even all in the slide because it didn't fit. I hope no one will come back to me asking, where am I? But they've been incredibly amazing, helping us to first understand the logic behind the reasoning, the logic behind our results. So, we're getting this, why are we getting this? And they would come up and say, well, a lot of, our clients or beneficiaries or participants think this because of that. And they will help us to kind of create a story around that. They've helped us engage participants, which is incredibly complicated, as I've told you. Like, it's difficult, it's a difficult project. It's things that people don't want to talk about. And it takes a lot of time. So, why are you going to do that, right? So, and they've helped us translate our research for policymakers. and for participant in particular initiatives, particular microcredit programs, or social prescribing, which essentially means that you link financial advice to a GP clinic, and you just deliver the same things at the same time. So, all in all, we have around 150 diarists in total. They've had doing financial diaries for 6 months with us, and most of these diaries are what we call now, what the Financial Conduct Authority labels as financially vulnerable. Now, financially vulnerable doesn't only mean that you live on a low income. You can be on a low income or not. What it means is, it's 4 things, but I'm going to talk about 3 today. One of them, the first one, is you have a health condition that prevents you from working, for example, or doing things that you do. The second one is you don't have enough money. If something comes up, for example, the ceiling of your toilet falls down, you don't have enough money to cover for the repair of the ceiling, right? And that is called not enough financial resilience. So, you couldn't face £500 expenditure if something happened to you. And then there is financial capability. And then there is major life events. And major life events are things like, your partner leaves you, or you leave your partner, you lose your job, you have a kid. So things that affect your life big. We've been working with people around Glasgow, London, and Birmingham. We have approximately 1,000 diary interviews conducted, recorded. And this has created not only those recordings of the interviews, which provide us with a lot of qualitative detail and color, but it has also created a lot of databases, like The Economist used to have very raw numbers of incoming and outcoming and disposable income and budgets of these 150 people during 6 months. And these are so consistent throughout the 4 projects that it's just, it's like, this is so obvious, why do people? Okay, so money and health are linked. Hey, this is big news, right? But at the beginning, mind you, at the beginning when COVID, we hadn't had COVID, we didn't know money and health linked in, so, with COVID it's very evident. I mean, you lose your job, right? So you don't have money, so you don't have health. So. But before we started, in our first project, we were being very conservative, and we were saying there is a perceived connection. So participants perceive that there is a connection between the money and the health. Right. Like the last project, it's not only a perceived connection, it's also a more objective connection between some of the financial measures we're seeing and some of the health measures we're using, a health score called the SF12. You can see how they correlate. Microcredit can reduce stress, that is another finding. And it's not only the use of microcredit, so it's not only actually getting the loan when you need it, it's about having the option to get a loan if you need it. So the ceiling of your toilet comes down and you need to repair it. And here you have the option of somebody lending you money fast, with affordable interest rates, and with repayment schedules that meet your needs, right? So it's easy. Participants had very sophisticated and very complex ways of managing their money. Again, economists will think, well, it's only people who have a lot of money that are using these super exciting and super complex advanced financial strategies to manage their money, and they're investing here and they're investing there. Actually, when you don't have money and you don't have slack, and you need to make the right decision, because if not, you or your family don't eat that day, you make incredibly, a lot more complex, but also a lot more original decisions. Very different, right? And I'm going to show some of the solutions that people were finding to cope with this, unexpected changes in income, unexpected changes in expenditure. So our participants were walking permanently this tagline, in which they needed to, make their income and their expenses meet. And it was very difficult, very complicated. And the main coping mechanism they usually had, so how do they cope when, they had a big expense coming up, they didn't have savings, or they lost their jobs and they didn't have any income anymore. Usually it's families and friends, right? Families and friends lend the money. Now this is a diagram from Finwell, London, but again, it's consistent throughout. People that get you out of trouble are your safety net, your friends, and your family. But not everyone likes asking for money to friends and family, and also your connections might be struggling just as you are. So in female COVID, for example, we found that people who were struggling, particularly in London, where transport is really high, rent was very high, they asked their network. So Alana was one of the diarists in London, and she would tell us about these choices they were permanently, these solutions they were making up as they lived. And she was saying, I still got food in my cupboard. I've still been able to provide a roof over our head. I feel it's a struggle. It is a constant struggle and it's a constant worry. But I don't feel poor because I still feel that by making all these choices, we can still provide the same things, sort of thing, because all we've done is tighten our belts and making obviously wise choices to get by. Okay? And the choices were obviously wise indeed. Man, how were they wise? So for female COVID, the best example was there were a lot of people who were not furloughed. They didn't have, access to furlough. They lost their jobs, like this. They perhaps were doing informal shifts. They were doing something else, and they had no income from one day to the next. So what did they do? They asked the networks for help. The networks couldn't help because they were exactly in the same position. A lot of the diarists in London became key workers. From one day to the next, they were carers, they were cleaners, they were delivery men. They did everything. They were risking their health, right? And the families hurt, but they needed money. So those were the wise choices. They didn't have a lot of options to play with. They played with the options they had, and they did a fantastic job. There are some colleagues called, thanks to Alba for this fantastic picture you got of me. There's a couple of colleagues called Shafira Mulaidan. They wrote a book called The Scarcity. And in this book what they say, and I quote literally, is something like, they're economists, right? They say something along the lines of poor people make poor financial decisions. But this is because, so that's a statement, right? But this is because they have so many things in their heads and they have this constant worry about money and what they're going to get money from and how they're going to spend it when they have it, that they don't think clearly. They don't think clearly. They have a lot of competing interests in their mind that takes a lot of bandwidth and a lot of energy from them, so they start making wrong decisions. At some point, the decisions are wrong. I wonder how they judge when a decision is wrong. Anyway. Oh, choice, right? So I've got some chocolates. Then I'm going to start offering my daughters. Let's give them the best choice. And then Alba. Get one, come on. Oh my goodness, too much choice. And then around here, thanks for coming. Thank you. And then to my PhD student, Mari, who's dying right now. And then I don't know. You see, BJ didn't have a lot of a choice, and a lot of you didn't have any chocolates at all, right? So it's not the same, the options that we have for the choices we can make. And this is Amina. So Amina was one of your first diaries in Glasgow. She had a shop, a clothes shop in the center, in the city center. She has 2 kids. No. She has one 2-year-old, and then she's pregnant with her second kid when we meet her. And she gives birth on month 4. Yeah. She's struggling, right? She's self-employed now, she's got her shop, but it's her that attends the shop. Her pregnancy is not going well. She's having a lot of health issues. She's tired, and she's having to go in and out of hospital, and she has a 2-year-old to look after. And she tries to think of different strategies. Look at that income line going down, right, from month 1 to month 2, and this was a trend, right? So, and this is not only household income, it's her, her income of the household and of the business. So that's coming down, and she needs more money to keep going, and also she needs more money to keep the clothes shop going, because that is what is going to help her when she delivers this baby, and everything's good, and she's going to provide for her 2 kids. So she's talking to us, and she's telling us about how she's struggling with money, and then suddenly she says, "Well, my the baby's going to arrive, in 2 weeks' time. I'm going to throw a party." Economist hat on. You're going to throw a party? Yes, I'm going to throw a party. Right. What are you going to throw a party? Oh, you'll see. Fine. Okay, so she hasn't got any money. She's going to throw a party for 100 people. She's crazy, right? The second baby, she's got health issues. She's not going to feel well. How's she going to organize this? This is her budget for month 4. She threw her party. It costed her £224. She got gifts for the new baby for £700 in money. And she got loans from family and friends for £600. These are loans that are very flexible to negotiate and are loans that have no interest rate. Right? So it was a very smart move. She also got her tax credit that month, which was brilliant. When you see the 2 lines of income and expenditure going so close, it just means that people are spending just what they can. They don't have any savings. It's bad. Then we have Dahlia. Dahlia was from London, and here you can see the black line is her mental health scale, so her mental health, and the blue line is her money, her income, money that's coming in. So she again has 2 kids, 3 and 6, but she has a chronic health condition called nystagmus, so an eye condition that prevents you from being able to concentrate for long periods of time, gives you headaches. So real bad. But her, disability living allowance was going on and off. She didn't know what was going on. She was, she was struggling. She was struggling to manage and struggling to manage the uncertainty as well. She didn't know how much she was going to make each month. So we could see, her health deteriorating from when we meet her. Then suddenly they tell her that the disability living allowance that she was on was stopped. Then in September, she appealed, and she learns about the appeal result. And you can see that her health stabilizing because the appeal was positive. She got a positive result, and then the PIP payments, the personal independence payment, kicks in October, 1 month afterwards. You see that big increase in income, because this is the lump sum of money that they should have paid during the months in which she was ill, and they didn't pay her. So they give her a lump sum that she obviously, that money goes in loans and repayment to friends, family, and different things that would keep her subsisting with £1,500 in London, city centre. And then you see that the income goes down to what it regularly should be around £2,000, sorry. But the mental health has stabilized because she now has that certainty that this PIP payment is going to come every month, at least for the next years. Okay, so that's it about technical or life stories. We have a website. There's lots of papers there. There's the more technical readings. They are in the website. And also, we have a new project right now. It's a slightly different project because we're collaborating with partners this time, so we're getting others into the financial diaries type of methodology and bringing them in to our madness or craziness. But the good thing is, this is funded by Nest Insight, so Nest are not necessarily academics, and they have a lot of kind of tentacles into DWP and HMRC and people who can make decisions on how giving people the right instruments to manage their money. Not only microcredit, pensions, savings, insurance, things like that. So another thing about having news and blogs and being right and being real well communicators is that we're streamlining the methodology. So now we're using open banking, which means before we went one by one all the transactions. Now we can see them as in a bank statement, and that makes our lives a lot easier. And it makes our diarists' life a lot easier too, because they can explain us the transactions, but they don't need to record them for us. Okay, so the main takeaways of today, I'm going to be very fast here. Financially vulnerable people need tools to manage the changes in income and expenditure. Income and expenditure change a lot, and people need to be able to manage those changes and to take away the thinking about money all the time, that uncertainty, am I going to get paid or not? How much am I going to get paid? How much can I spend? But these better choices that we think, people financially vulnerable need to make better choices, right? But you also need to give them the best options possible. We need a range of options, right? So that people make those better choices. The better options will, at least for microcredit, will improve or at least preserve health, because they will give people some agency in controlling the money that they have. Microcredit is an option, but it's slowly disappearing. So the microfinance institutions that we started working with, Growing in the UK and Scottish, they have both disappeared, as many others on the way, Street UK and others, because it's not financially sustainable. They are competing with people or high-cost lenders, which are no longer there, but that charge a lot higher interest rates. So the Financial Conduct Authority is clamping on those high-cost lenders, and that's fantastic. but they're not giving people alternatives to borrow from. You know, now we are onto illegal money lenders, and we are into buy now, pay later schemes. And then there will be something else that will come along, because people need the options to manage their money, to smooth their income. So that is not enough. And we think, or I think, that we need government resources poured into organizations that are giving people these non-sustainable options. So, and this is our book. After 11 years in the Youth Center working on this. Thank you so much for coming, for listening, and for being rude.
Much, Olga, for a fantastic lecture and insight into both your journey and into your amazing work in the area of finances and health. We are running out of time, which is a shame because I can see that there's other people who would like to engage, but we can engage in further conversation over wine and snacks, and I'm the person who's between you and the wine and snacks. So keep my closing remarks very, very brief. But I do want to say that I think in Olga's lecture we've got a real picture of an outstanding researcher with a very distinctive research vision that she brings to GCU and to the UNIS Centre, and which we hugely appreciate you for. I also want to say that personally, as a woman in economics, you are an inspiration. As somebody who is able to do economics in a way that also brings to light the real lives that are behind the numbers that we're looking at. So we've learned a lot from you, Olga, in the last decade or so, and so delighted to be able to celebrate with you tonight. And if you will join me in congratulating Professor Olga Biosca.